Bikers push a mechanic around at his auto shop, surrounding the disabled Vietnam veteran and threatening to destroy everything he's built with his own hands. The Death's Head motorcycle gang thinks they've found easy prey, a 68-year-old man with a prosthetic leg who can't fight back against 16 leather-clad thugs. But the quiet stranger in the black leather jacket isn't just another customer getting his brakes fixed. This is Steven Seagal himself. The bikers have no idea they just cornered a decorated war hero in front of a man who's spent decades breaking bones with ancient martial arts. While the gang leader puts a knife to the old mechanic's throat, the aikido master steps out of the shadows with that deadly whisper that's terrified criminals for 50 years. The veteran recognizes his savior and grips his tire iron tighter, knowing these punks are about to learn why some legends never retire. The bikers keep revving their engines, thinking noise and numbers will win this fight, but they're actually announcing their own destruction. What happens when street thugs meet a living weapon? Will the gang survive discovering why you never threaten the innocent in front of Steven Seagal? What happened next would terrorize the bikers for the rest of their pathetic lives. Before we jump back and tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The desert sun had barely crested the Nevada mountains when Frank Morrison turned the key to Morrison's auto repair, the metal door protesting with a familiar squeal. At 68, every morning brought the same ritual. Unlock the bay doors, check the ancient answering machine for messages that rarely came, and pretend the stack of unpaid invoices wasn't growing thicker by the week. His prosthetic left leg clicked against the concrete as he moved through the shop, a sound that had become as natural as breathing over the past 47 years. The Purple Heart mounted next to his workbench caught the early light, positioned beside a faded photograph of him in Army fatigues, Vietnam 1971. Sergeant Frank Morrison, before the landmine that took his leg but somehow left his spirit intact. Cedar Falls stretched beyond his windows like a town forgotten by time. Empty storefronts lined Main Street, their dusty windows reflecting a community that had watched its young people leave and its dreams fade. Frank's shop sat on prime real estate now, though he couldn't understand why anyone would want this patch of struggling desert town. The bell above his door chimed as Mrs. Patterson shuffled in, her weathered hands clutching keys to a 1995 Honda that had seen better decades. Oil change, Frank. Nothing fancy. Yes, ma'am. $35, same as always. She counted out crumpled bills with the careful precision of someone who knew exactly how much remained until the next Social Security check. Frank had stopped charging full price months ago, though he'd never tell her that. Some dignity was worth more than profit. As he worked beneath the Honda, muscle memory guiding his hands through familiar motions, Frank's mind wandered to simpler times. When Margaret was alive, when the shop stayed busy, when Cedar Falls felt like a place with a future. The prosthetic leg that had once seemed like the end of everything had become just another tool in his arsenal of adaptation. Why closing time. The register held $35 and a handful of loose change. Frank locked up as the sun painted the desert sky in shades of amber and rust. A convoy of black SUVs moved slowly down Main Street, their tinted windows dark as secrets. He watched them pass, noting how they seemed to study every building, every weakness. Something was coming to Cedar Falls. Frank could feel it in his bones the way he'd once felt incoming mortars in the jungle. He climbed the stairs to his small apartment above the shop, unaware that tomorrow would change everything. The rumble started low, like distant thunder rolling across the desert floor. Frank paused in his morning inspection of Mrs. Patterson's Honda, wrench suspended in midair. As the sound grew closer, 12 Harley-Davidsons roared into his parking lot with the precision of a military formation, their chrome gleaming like weapons in the morning sun. The lead rider killed his engine with deliberate slowness. Snake Davidson unfolded from his bike like violence given human form. 6 feet 2 inches of prison-hardened muscle wrapped in leather and malice. The cobra tattoo coiled around his throat seemed to pulse with each heartbeat, its fanged head disappearing beneath his jaw. Death's Head MC patches decorated his vest like medals of dishonor. Behind him, his crew dismounted with practiced intimidation. Razor Kelly, thin as a blade and twice as sharp, flexed scarred knuckles while scanning for exits. Bone Martinez, 300 pounds of silent menace, cracked his neck with sounds like breaking timber. The remaining bikers formed a semicircle, their engines ticking as they cooled. Frank emerged from beneath the Honda, wiping oil-stained hands on a rag that had seen 40 years of honest work. His steel-blue eyes met Snake's cold stare without flinching. In Vietnam, he'd faced down men who wanted him dead. These leather-clad bullies didn't rate high on his fear meter. "Help you gentlemen with something?" Frank's voice carried the steady calm of a man who'd survived worse than whatever these boys could dish out. Snake's gold teeth caught the light as he smiled. "Frank Morrison, right? Heard you got yourself a nice little business here." He gestured at the modest shop with theatrical appreciation. "Real nice location. Prime real estate, you might say. It's an honest living." "Honest." Snake rolled the word around his mouth like something distasteful. "That's what I like to hear. Makes what I'm about to tell you even sweeter." He stepped closer, his presence filling Frank's personal space with the smell of leather and cigarettes. $50,000. Cash money, no questions asked. You sign over this dump to my associates, and you can retire somewhere nice. Maybe Florida. Old folks love Florida. Frank's grip tightened on the wrench. "And if I'm not interested in retiring?" Snake's smile widened, showing more gold than enamel. "Then we'll have to discuss the many ways an old man can get hurt in a town like this. Accidents happen, you know, especially to heroes who forget they're not heroes anymore." The threat hung in the desert air like heat shimmer. Frank's prosthetic legs steadied his stance as memories of jungle firefights flickered through his mind. He'd faced down enemy soldiers and survived. He'd be damned if he'd bow to street thugs. 48 hours, Snake announced, swinging back onto his Harley. "Think it over, Gimp." The Cedar Falls Public Library's computer hummed like an aging refrigerator as Frank researched property values, his calloused fingers struggling with the unfamiliar keyboard. The numbers on the screen told a story he didn't like. His modest lot was worth at least $300,000, thanks to recent commercial zoning changes he'd never heard about at the T-Town Hall. Nervous clerk Peggy Coleman glanced over her shoulder before pulling out a thick folder marked Web Development Corporation. Her voice dropped to a whisper as she explained how properties had been quietly changing hands for months, always through shell companies, always for suspiciously low prices. "Mr. Morrison, maybe you should just take their offer." Peggy's hands trembled as she spoke. "Bad things happen to people who don't cooperate. The Henderson place burned down last month. Gas leak, they said, but..." Frank studied the development. Plans spread across the counter. A massive casino complex, complete with hotels and shopping centers, designed to swallow Main Street whole. His shop sat right in the middle of the proposed parking lot. The walk back to Morrison's auto repair felt longer than usual, his prosthetic leg aching with each step. The afternoon sun revealed fresh damage, spray-painted obscenities across his windows, the word "condemned" dripping in red paint like blood. Someone had scattered broken glass in his parking lot, the shards glittering like malicious stars. His remaining customers had vanished. Betty Kowalski from the diner called to cancel her truck's tune-up, her voice tight with poorly concealed fear. Raymond Fisher, the retired teacher whose Buick Frank had maintained for 15 years, sent his grandson with an apologetic note explaining he'd found another mechanic. Tom Bradley from the gas station wouldn't even take Frank's calls. The isolation hit harder than the financial loss. For 40 years, Frank had built relationships through honest work and fair dealing. Now those connections dissolved like morning frost, leaving him alone with his principles and his pride. Evening found him sitting in his shop, the Purple Heart heavy in his palm. Margaret's photograph smiled at him from the workbench, her eyes holding the same determination that had carried them through his recovery, through the lean years of building the business, through every challenge life had thrown their way. The phone rang once, its shrill tone echoing through the empty shop. Frank lifted the receiver, hoping for a customer, a friend, anyone willing to stand with him. "Sheriff's Department. Deputy Collins? This is Frank Morrison. I need to report vandalism and Mr. Morrison." The young deputy's voice carried exhaustion. Beyond his years, "Sheriff Hartwell is handling sensitive county business right now. Maybe you should reconsider that generous offer before things get more complicated." The line went dead, leaving Frank staring at the silent phone. Even the law had abandoned him. The Black Mercury Grand Marquis materialized from the heat shimmer. like something from another era, its California plates dusty from desert roads. Frank watched through his vandalized windows as the driver emerged with fluid grace. Tall, lean, moving with the controlled economy of a predator at rest. The stranger's ponytail caught the afternoon breeze as he surveyed the spray-painted obscenities without comment. His leather jacket had seen hard miles, worn soft in places that suggested frequent use rather than fashion. Dark eyes swept the street with systematic precision, cataloging details most people would miss: sight lines, escape routes, potential threats lurking in shadows. "Break work," the man said, his voice barely above a whisper, yet somehow carrying absolute authority. "How long?" Frank quoted 120 for the job, expecting negotiation or complaint. Instead, the stranger peeled 620s from a thick roll of cash, his movements deliberate and unhurried. No questions about price, no small talk about the weather or the obvious vandalism. Just business conducted with military efficiency. "I can wait." The Mercury's brake system told stories of hard use. Pads worn thin from mountain roads, rotors scarred by emergency stops. Frank worked with practiced hands while the stranger sat motionless on a folding chair, his stillness somehow more unsettling than constant motion would have been. Those dark eyes never stopped moving, reading the street like a tactical manual. "Visitors been giving you trouble?" The question came without preamble, spoken to the air rather than directly to Frank. Frank emerged from beneath the car, wiping his hands on a rag already stained with 40 years of honest labor. "Nothing I can't handle." The stranger's slight nod suggested he'd heard similar denials before, probably from men who discovered too late they were wrong. His presence filled the shop with an energy Frank recognized from Vietnam, the coiled readiness of someone who'd survived by staying 3 steps ahead of death. "Name's Steven." The introduction came with a handshake that spoke of controlled strength, calloused palms that had known both weapons and work. "Frank Morrison. This is my place." Steven's eyes took in the Purple Heart display, the faded army photograph, the evidence of a life built through service and sacrifice. Something passed between them, recognition between warriors separated by different wars but united by common understanding. "Good work," Steven said as Frank tested the new brakes. The Mercury responded with smooth precision, its stopping power restored to factory specifications. Frank found himself talking about his visitor problems as Steven counted out payment. Something about the man's quiet presence encouraged honesty, the way a good priest or therapist might draw out confessions. "I've seen worse," Steven replied, and somehow Frank believed him completely. Thursday morning brought the rumble of 16 motorcycles. The Death's Head crew reinforced by 4 additional bikers from Reno. Frank lay beneath a 2003 Ford Explorer, changing transmission fluid, when boots surrounded the car like a steel-toed forest. The familiar sound of his toolbox crashing to concrete echoed through the shop. "Time's up, Gimp." Snake's voice carried the satisfaction of a man used to getting his way through violence. 50 grand was the friendly price. Now it's 30, and you pay us for damages to our reputation. Wrenches and sockets scattered across the floor as Razor Kelly kicked the overturned toolbox again. His switchblade appeared with practiced ease, the steel catching morning light as he tested its edge against his thumb. Blood welled up, bright crimson against pale skin. Bone Martinez grabbed Frank's prosthetic leg with casual cruelty, his massive hands finding the connection point where metal met flesh. "Want to see how fast we can make you shorter, old man?" Frank gripped his tire iron, 40 years of automotive work having built surprising strength in his arms. The weight felt familiar, comforting, but 16-1 were impossible odds. His military training cataloged exits, weapons, anything that might even the playing field, but the math remained brutal. "Getting ideas?" Snake laughed, the sound like grinding gears. "Drop it before we decide to take more than just your shop." The office door opened with deliberate silence. Steven emerged from the shadows like smoke given form, his movements fluid as water, controlled as precision machinery. His dark eyes swept the scene without apparent concern, taking in the scattered tools, the drawn blade, the casual violence of men who'd never faced real consequences. "Gentlemen," Steven's whisper somehow carried more authority than any shout. "I think you're in the wrong neighborhood." Snake's gold teeth flashed in what might have been a smile. And I think you're about to join Grandpa here in intensive care. Boys, looks like we got ourselves a hero. The bikers shifted positions with pack mentality, surrounding their prey with practiced coordination. Leather creaked. Chains rattled. The smell of oil and gasoline mixed with something more primal. The scent of violence about to be unleashed. Steven stood perfectly still, waiting. Snake reached for Steven with the confidence of a man who'd never met his match. The biker's massive hand shot out like a striking cobra, seeking to crush this stranger's windpipe. Steven's response was instantaneous, a perfect aikido redirection that sent Snake's own momentum crashing him into his chrome-laden Harley before Snake could recover. Steven's fingers found the pressure point on the big man's throat. Not crushing, not killing, but applying precise force that cut off airflow without permanent damage. "I don't repeat myself," Steven whispered, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd whispered final words to men in darker places. The remaining bikers attacked like a pack, their coordination dissolving into individual rage. Razor Kelly lunged with his switchblade, the steel seeking Steven's ribs. Steven's palm met Razor's wrist with surgical precision, the snap of breaking bone audible over the chaos. The knife clattered harmlessly across concrete. Bone Martinez charged like an enraged bull, 300 pounds of prison muscle behind his haymaker punch. Steven stepped aside at the last possible second, his ridge hand finding the giant's throat with devastating accuracy. Bone dropped like a felled tree, gasping for air that wouldn't come. Two bikers rushed simultaneously from different angles. Steven flowed between them like liquid death, using their momentum against them. An elbow strike folded one around his middle, while a perfectly timed hip throw sent the other sailing into the shop's tool cabinet. The remaining attackers hesitated, suddenly aware they were witnessing something beyond their understanding. This wasn't street fighting or prison brawling. This was art, violent, beautiful, and utterly one-sided. Steven moved through them with methodical precision, each technique flowing into the next. Joint locks snapped bones with wet finality. Pressure point strikes dropped grown men like marionettes. With cut strings. Not one movement wasted, not one technique excessive. In 30 seconds, 8 bikers littered the concrete like broken toys. The survivors dragged their groaning brothers toward their motorcycles, Snake gasping threats through his damaged throat while clutching his ruined windpipe. "This ain't over," Snake wheezed, blood speckling his lips. "You just signed both your death warrants." Steven stood unmarked among the scattered wrenches and spilled oil, not even breathing hard. Frank stared in amazement, recognizing he'd witnessed something legendary. A master craftsman applying decades of deadly skill with surgical precision. Steven helped Frank collect scattered tools with the same fluid economy he'd shown in combat, treating wrenches and sockets with the same respect he'd show weapons. Frank's hands trembled slightly as he righted his overturned toolbox, 40 years of peaceful routine shattered by 30 seconds of controlled violence. "Most folks would have run," Frank observed, organizing his tools with military precision despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. Steven shrugged, examining a bent wrench before setting it aside for repair. "Most folks haven't seen what I've seen." The conversation came in fragments, two warriors sharing classified histories in the universal language of men who'd served. Steven revealed pieces of his background, special forces operations in places that didn't officially exist, years of martial arts training that had forged his body into a living weapon, a personal code that wouldn't let him walk away from injustice. Frank shared his own story, Vietnam's jungle hell, the landmine that took his leg but somehow left his spirit intact. 40 years of building this shop with disability compensation and relentless determination. They discovered the shared understanding that comes from serving something greater than yourself, from knowing what it means to stand between evil and the innocent. "Built this place with my own hands," Frank said, running weathered fingers along his workbench. "Margaret, that's my wife in the picture there. She kept the books while I learned the trade. 40 years of honest work, fair prices, treating folks right." Steven studied the faded photograph, noting the pride in both faces, the shared determination that had carried them through recovery and lean years. "Good woman. The best. Cancer took her 3 years back." Shop's been dying ever since. The admission hung between them like morning mist. Frank had never spoken those words aloud, but something about Steven's quiet presence encouraged honesty. They'll be back, Steven stated with professional certainty. Men like that don't accept defeat. They'll escalate. Frank offered Steven the small apartment above the office, which had sat vacant since Margaret's death. Steven accepted with a simple nod, no questions about rent or duration. As they shook hands, Frank noticed Steven's eyes constantly scanning the street, old habits from dangerous places. What do you think they'll do next? Frank asked that Steven's reply carried the weight of vast experience with violence. They'll escalate. Webb Development's temporary headquarters occupied the second floor of Cedar Falls' old bank building, its windows overlooking Main Street like the eyes of a predator surveying hunting grounds. Marcus Webb sat behind a mahogany desk that cost more than most locals earned in 6 months, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the desert heat. Snake Davidson slumped in the client chair, ice pack pressed against his throat where Steven's fingers had found pressure points with surgical precision. His voice came in painful whispers, each word a reminder of humiliation at the hands of a man he'd underestimated. Professional, Snake gasped, his cobra tattoo dark against skin mottled with bruises. Moves like special forces, maybe worse. Took down 8 of my boys without breaking a sweat. Webb's cold blue eyes showed no sympathy for Snake's injuries, only calculating assessment of a situation spinning beyond control. This casino development was supposed to be simple: buy out or intimidate a few stubborn locals, clear the land, begin construction. Instead, one mysterious stranger had shattered months of careful planning. This is about more than real estate, Webb said, opening a thick folder marked with Chicago addresses. The casino is a front for washing money from 3 different families. $40 million in dirty cash needs cleaning, and Cedar Falls was perfect, small, isolated, controllable. Snake leaned forward despite the pain, understanding dawning in his violence-dulled eyes. How much heat we talking about? Enough to bury this entire town if we fail. Webb's manicured fingers drummed against the desk. The families don't accept excuses. They accept results. Webb reached for his phone, dialing a number from memory. His conversation was brief, professional, and chilling in its implications. When he hung up, Snake recognized the look of a man who'd just ordered deaths. Make an example, Webb ordered. Quietly. No witnesses, no loose ends. The old man and his protector disappear. This town learns what happens to heroes. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Sheriff Dutch Hartwell's patrol car pulled up outside Morrison's auto repair, followed by 3 deputies with weapons drawn. Through the window, Webb watched Steven emerge from the shop, hands visible but unafraid. Resisting arrest, Webb murmured with satisfaction. Tragic how dangerous fugitives can be. Steven offered no resistance as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. His final words to Frank carried clearly across the evening air. Take care of the shop. Cedar Falls County Jail squatted like a concrete toad on the town's outskirts, its fluorescent lights humming with the persistence of trapped insects. Steven sat motionless in the holding cell, his breathing slow and controlled, hands resting palms up on his knees in perfect meditation posture. Sheriff Dutch Hartwell prowled the narrow corridor like a caged bear, his thick body gone soft around the middle from years of taking bribes instead of chasing criminals. Sweat stained his uniform despite the desert night's coolness, nervousness radiating from every pore. You picked the wrong town to play hero, Hartwell growled, keys jangling as he unlocked the cell door. Accidents happen in jail. Prisoners fall down stairs, slip in showers, choke on their dinner. Steven's dark eyes met Hartwell's gaze without blinking, the steady stare of a man who'd faced death in places Hartwell couldn't imagine. The sheriff's intimidation tactics, the raised voice, the aggressive posturing, the casual threats, bounced off Steven like rain off stone. Deputy Collins shifted uncomfortably behind his superior, young enough to remember when law enforcement meant protecting citizens rather than terrorizing them. His discomfort showed in fidgeting hands and averted eyes, conscience warring with career survival. Cat got your tongue. Hartwell leaned closer, bourbon breath washing over Steven's impassive face. Maybe you didn't hear me. Bad things happen to outsiders who stick their noses where they don't belong. Steven's silence stretched like a taut wire, his presence somehow more intimidating than any threat. Hartwell found himself stepping backward, unnerved by the controlled stillness that suggested vast reserves of deadly potential held in perfect check. "Boss," Collins ventured, "maybe we should—" "Shut up," Hartwell snapped, his authority cracking under Steven's unwavering stare. The sheriff stormed out, leaving Collins alone with the prisoner. Through the barred window, Steven could see Main Street and Frank's shop. Dark figures moved around the building. More bikers, setting up for continued harassment. Steven began planning with the methodical precision of a chess master, his mind cataloging resources and options. Dawn was 6 hours away. Time enough to consider variables, evaluate weaknesses, prepare for the next phase of a war these criminals had started but would never finish. Betty's Diner occupied the heart of Main Street, like the town's kitchen table, its red vinyl booths, and checkered linoleum worn smooth by decades of coffee cups and honest conversation. Steam rose from Betty Kowalski's coffee pot as worried locals gathered in the pre-dawn darkness, their faces grave with shared concern. "They arrested Steven on trumped-up charges," Betty announced, her Polish accent thickening with anger. "Frank's alone out there, and those animals will be back." Raymond Fisher, retired teacher and keeper of institutional memory, spread crumpled bills across the counter with trembling hands. "My Social Security check. Every penny." That man stood up for what's right. Tom Bradley emptied his gas station's register, quarters and dimes mixing with worn dollar bills. Martha Hendricks offered her late husband's gold watch, its weight heavy, with 40 years of faithful service. One by one, the senior citizens of Cedar Falls contributed what little they had. $5,000. Betty counted, her voice thick with emotion. "Never thought I'd see this town show backbone again." The march to the courthouse resembled a gray-haired army, walking sticks and canes tapping against sidewalk concrete. Judge Patricia Wells waited in her chambers, steel-gray hair pulled back with military precision, sharp blue eyes missing nothing. "Assault charges," she read from the paperwork, skepticism evident in every syllable. "Against a man who was attacked by 16 bikers while helping a disabled veteran." Betty stepped forward, her decades of serving coffee and listening to troubles having prepared her for this moment. "Your Honor, that man saved Frank Morrison from a beating. We won't stand by and watch good people get destroyed." Judge Wells set bail at $5,000, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent 40 years fighting corruption in various forms. "Mr. Steven, you're released on your own recognizance. I strongly advise you to stay out of trouble." The warning carried layers of meaning. Official protection within legal limits. Unofficial acknowledgement that sometimes justice required action beyond courtroom procedures. Steven emerged into sunlight, surrounded by supporters who'd risked their limited resources for a stranger's freedom. Frank waited by the courthouse steps, his weathered face showing relief mixed with determination. "Thank you," Steven said simply, the words carrying weight beyond their simplicity. Judge Wells watched from her window as the unlikely army dispersed, hope flickering in her experienced eyes like candle flame in darkness. Morrison's auto repair buzzed with nervous energy as Steven and Frank worked after hours, the bay doors locked against prying eyes. Frank's military training provided foundation for Steven's instruction, his Vietnam experience translating aikido principles into practical self-defense for a man with limited mobility. "Force flows like water," Steven demonstrated, redirecting Frank's clumsy punch into empty air. "Don't fight it. Guide it where you want it to go." Frank's prosthetic leg complicated balance, but Steven adapted techniques with the patience of a master teacher. Pressure points could disable regardless of physical limitations. Leverage could overcome size and strength advantages. Most importantly, confidence could transform a victim into a survivor. Fought in Vietnam, Frank panted during a break, sweat beading despite the desert evening's coolness. "Thought I knew about violence." "Different kind of war," Steven replied, adjusting Frank's stance with gentle corrections. "That was survival. This is protection. Same skills, different heart." They worked until midnight, Frank's movements becoming more fluid with each repetition. His military bearing returned as muscle memory awakened, the soldier emerging from beneath 40 years of civilian routine. Steven found himself impressed by the older man's retention and adaptability. "Tell me about Margaret," Steven said as they locked up, recognizing the need for human connection beyond combat training. Frank's weathered face softened. "Nurse at the VA hospital. Married me when I was still figuring out how to walk on this thing." He tapped his prosthetic leg. Said she fell for the man, not the parts. 43 years together before cancer took her. Good woman leaves good. Lessons, Steven observed. Taught me that helping people was worth any sacrifice. Built this shop to prove a man could still contribute, still matter. Frank's voice carried the weight of recent doubt. Some days I wondered if she was wrong. Steven's response came with quiet certainty. She wasn't. As they climbed the stairs to their respective quarters, both men carried renewed purpose. Frank slept better than he had in months, while Steven maintained his vigil at the window, dark, eyes cataloging new threats. Additional motorcycles lined the street. Unfamiliar faces watched from parked cars. The enemy was escalating, just as he'd predicted. War was coming to Cedar Falls. Saturday night erupted in orange flames and black smoke as Frank's parts warehouse exploded like a miniature sun, the blast rattling windows 3 blocks away. $30,000 of carefully hoarded automotive inventory, brake pads, filters, belts, and fluids, vanished in seconds of professional arson. Steven reached the scene first, his trained eyes reading burn patterns while fire trucks screamed. Through the night, accelerant splash marks, multiple ignition points, timer residue in the debris. This wasn't amateur vandalism, but expert destruction designed to send a message written in ash and ruin. Frank arrived as the roof collapsed, his life's backup inventory disappearing into hungry flames. Insurance had lapsed 6 months ago when money grew too tight for non-essentials. Without parts, Morrison's auto repair couldn't function. Without income, Frank couldn't survive. Professional job, Steven observed, studying the wreckage with military precision. Viper Jackson's work, probably. Prison teaches useful skills to the wrong people. 2 elderly brothers from the adjacent welding shop coughed smoke from their lungs as paramedics loaded them into ambulances. Collateral damage in a war they hadn't chosen, innocent victims of escalating criminal violence. Web development had crossed a line from intimidation to terrorism. The message was clear: surrender or watch everyone suffer for Frank's stubbornness. Economic pressure had failed, so they'd chosen scorched earth tactics. "They want me broken," Frank said, watching. 40 years of careful accumulation reduced to smoking rubble. "Want me begging to sell." Steven's jaw tightened as he studied the burn patterns, recognizing professional techniques he'd seen in places that didn't officially exist. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about whether evil could triumph through superior firepower. And criminal connections. "Insurance?" Steven asked, though he already knew the answer from Frank's expression. "Lapsed. I'm finished unless I take Webb's deal." Frank's military bearings straightened despite the devastating loss. 40 years of honest work, gone in 30 seconds. Steven's response carried the weight of absolute commitment. This isn't about money anymore. It's about whether good people can still stand up to evil. Frank nodded, understanding passing between warriors who'd faced impossible odds before. They walked back to the shop in companionable silence, both men knowing the next phase would test everything they'd learned about courage, honor, and the price of standing against darkness behind them. The warehouse continued burning, casting dancing shadows across Main Street like warnings of worse things coming. Sunday night descended over Cedar Falls like a black shroud, perfect cover for Steven's systematic campaign of psychological warfare. The Rusty Spoke Tavern squatted on the town's outskirts, its neon beer signs casting sickly light over 12 Harley-Davidsons parked in military precision behind the building. Steven moved through shadows with predatory silence, 40 years of covert training reducing him to a whisper of displaced air. Each motorcycle received surgical attention, sugar dissolved into gas tanks, brake lines severed with precision cuts, wheel bolts loosened to critical failure points, his signature marked. Each sabotaged machine, a small paper crane folded from napkin paper, left perched on handlebars like origami promises of justice. The symbolism wasn't lost on men who understood only violence. Their prey had become the hunter. Monday brought the first accident. Razor Kelly's Harley seized at 60 miles per hour on Highway 50, the engine destroying itself in spectacular fashion. Emergency surgery saved his leg, but the steel rod in his femur would remind him of Steven's reach every winter morning. Tuesday saw Bone Martinez's front wheel separate from his bike during a routine intimidation run through town. 3 broken ribs and a concussion left the giant biker questioning his life choices from a hospital bed. Morphine unable to dull the fear growing in his drug-addled brain that Wednesday's victim was Viper Jackson himself, the Scorpion crew leader. Discovering too late that brake fluid and concrete walls made poor dance partners. His scarred face acquired fresh decoration courtesy of asphalt and physics, while his reputation for invincibility crumbled like his shattered motorcycle. By Thursday, 6 bikers occupied hospital beds with mechanical failures, their injuries ranging from broken bones to severe road rash. 3 more sat in county lockup after Steven's anonymous tips led police to carefully planted drug stashes. The Death's Head and Scorpion crews huddled in the rusty spoke like spooked cattle, jumping at shadows and checking their motorcycles obsessively. Paranoia spread through their ranks like infection, each man wondering if his bike would be next, if the mysterious paper crane would appear on his handlebars like a death sentence. Snake Davidson's throat still ached from Steven's pressure point. Demonstration, but fear hurt worse than physical pain. They were no longer hunting a disabled veteran and his protector. They were being systematically destroyed by a professional who turned their own violence against them. Webb Developments. Temporary headquarters buzzed with crisis management energy as Marcus Webb paced behind his mahogany desk like a caged predator. Stock reports and financial projections lay forgotten beneath police reports detailing his enforcement crew's systematic destruction. 8 men down, Snake wheezed, his damaged throat making speech painful. Half my crew's in the hospital or jail. The rest are scared to start their engines. Webb's manicured fingers drummed against expensive wood, each tap marking another second of mounting pressure from Chicago investors who expected results, not excuses. 40 million in dirty money, waited for laundering, and powerful men grew impatient when their financial schedules faced disruption. Enough games, Webb declared, reaching for his encrypted phone. The conversation was brief, conducted in the coded language of professional criminals. When he disconnected, Snake recognized the cold determination of a man who'd moved beyond intimidation into elimination territory. We take the diner woman, Webb announced with corporate efficiency. Force them into an unwinnable situation. No more surgical strikes, no more cat-and-mouse games. In this tonight. Thursday evening found Betty Kowalski closing her diner with customary precision, wiping down tables and counting register receipts with the practiced routine of 30 years in business. The bell above her door chimed as Deputy Collins entered, his young face twisted with reluctant guilt. "Sorry, ma'am," Collins whispered, genuine regret coloring his voice. Orders from the sheriff. The kidnapping was professionally executed. No witnesses, no evidence, no struggle. Betty's purse remained on the counter, coffee still warm in the pot, apple pie cooling on the windowsill like a Norman Rockwell painting interrupted by criminal reality. Frank discovered the note Friday morning, the precise handwriting carrying Webb's corporate signature. Mining facility, Route 9, Sunset. Come alone or the diner lady dies. No cops, no tricks. Steven examined the message with professional assessment, recognizing the obvious trap while understanding they had no choice. Betty's life hung in the balance. Innocent blood that would stain their consciences forever if they chose safety over sacrifice. Walking into a killing ground, Steven stated matter-of-factly, checking his concealed weapons with practiced efficiency. They'll have the high ground, superior numbers, prepared positions. Frank gripped his shotgun with steady hands, military. Training overriding civilian fear. Can't leave Betty to those animals. Steven nodded, understanding the mathematics of honor that made survival secondary to protecting the innocent. As they drove toward the abandoned mining facility, sunset painting the desert blood red, both men knew they might not return. The abandoned copper mining facility sprawled across the desert like the skeleton of some industrial dinosaur, its rusted machinery and concrete foundations creating a maze of shadows and death traps. Stephen and Frank arrived as the sun painted the western sky in shades of violence, their headlights cutting through gathering darkness. Betty sat tied to a chair in the main processing building, her position clearly visible through broken windows, bait for a trap engineered with military precision. Stephen counted muzzle flashes and movement patterns, his experienced eye cataloging at least 16 hostiles positioned throughout the complex. Snake Davidson and Viper Jackson flanked their captive like bookends of brutality, both men eager to demonstrate their recovery from recent humiliations. Additional bikers occupied elevated positions among the machinery, their weapons trained on obvious approach routes. 16-2, Frank observed, checking his shotgun's action with professional calm. Been in worse odds. Stephen's tactical assessment was grimmer. The facility offered multiple kill zones, overlapping fields of fire, and defensive positions that favored the entrenched enemy. Approaching the main building required crossing open ground under concentrated fire from elevated positions. We go. In hard and fast, Stephen decided, drawing his .45 automatic from its concealed holster. Darkness is our ally. They expect us to surrender, not fight. The assault began with Stephen killing the facility's main power transformer, plunging the complex into blessed darkness. Emergency lighting flickered sporadically, creating a strobing landscape of shadows and confusion that favored the attackers over the defenders. Stephen moved through the industrial maze like liquid death, his 40 years of combat experience reducing him to whisper and movement. Pressure point strikes dropped sentries silently, their unconscious forms hidden among the machinery like discarded equipment. Frank provided crucial intelligence about the facility's layout, his brief employment here in the 1980s proving invaluable for navigation through the mechanical labyrinth. His shotgun boomed occasionally, each blast carefully aimed to disable rather than kill. The running battle flowed through concrete corridors and around massive equipment, Stephen using the terrain to isolate enemies and eliminate them systematically. His aikido training turned the bikers' aggression against them, their momentum becoming the source of their destruction. Victory seemed assured when Sheriff Hartwell's voice boomed over a bullhorn. This is the law. Everyone come out with hands visible. Stephen recognized the trap immediately. These weren't rescue units, but executioners wearing badges. Sheriff Hartwell's convoy surrounded the mining facility like a military operation, 6 patrol cars with light bars painting the desert in alternating red and blue. The corrupt lawman's amplified voice carried across the industrial wasteland with false authority. Armed and dangerous fugitives, come out with hands visible or will be forced to use deadly force. Stephen counted muzzle flashes from the patrol cars, recognizing the positioning of men prepared for execution rather than arrest. Hartwell's orders were clear: stage a gunfight where the dangerous fugitive and his accomplice died while resisting arrest. In the chaos of flashing lights and shouted commands, Snake Davidson escaped with Betty, dragging her into the mine's tunnel system where even corrupt cops couldn't easily follow. The biker's damaged throat made him desperate for revenge, his original mission forgotten in favor of personal satisfaction. They're not here to arrest us, Stephen told Frank. Both men crouched behind concrete barriers as bullets sparked off steel beams above their heads. Webb owns them completely. Deputy Collins' voice crackled over the radio, young conscience warring with career survival. Sheriff, maybe we should call for backup, follow proper procedures. Shut up and shoot when I give the word, Hartwell snarled, his corruption complete and ugly in the emergency lighting. No witnesses, no loose ends. Webb wants this cleaned up tonight. Stephen and Frank found themselves pinned in the facility's administrative building, their ammunition limited against 6 corrupt officers with automatic weapons. The mathematics were brutal: trained lawmen with superior firepower versus 2 men armed with handguns and determination. How do we get out of this one? Frank asked, gripping his shotgun with steady hands despite impossible odds. Stephen's reply carried grim determination. We remind them what real warriors look like. Through broken windows, they could see Hartwell coordinating the final assault, his corrupt deputies moving into position for the killing shots that would end Cedar Falls resistance forever. The sheriff's radio crackled with Webb's impatient demands for confirmation. Emergency lights flickered like dying stars as the corrupt lawmen, closed their trap. In the distance, sirens wailed, but whether rescue or reinforcement remained unknown. Frank chambered his final shells, his military bearing intact despite facing overwhelming odds. Steven checked his .45's magazine, counting bullets against enemies with professional precision. Dawn was still hours away, but darkness offered no sanctuary against men who'd sold their badges to the highest bidder. Steven studied the corrupt deputies through cracked concrete, identifying their fatal weakness with predatory precision. These weren't warriors but bullies with badges, their movements revealing inexperience with actual combat beyond intimidating civilians and collecting bribes. "They expect us to fight like criminals," Steven whispered to Frank, his voice carrying deadly certainty. "Panic, waste ammunition, make desperate moves. Instead, we fight like soldiers." The facility's industrial infrastructure became Steven's battlefield, decades of covert training reducing him to shadow and silence. He moved through maintenance tunnels and air ducts like smoke, appearing behind deputy positions with surgical precision. Deputy Morrison, no relation to Frank despite the shared name, found himself unconscious before his radio could carry a warning. Steven's pressure point strike, dropping him silently beside a rusted conveyor belt. His weapon disappeared into the darkness. Deputy Blake discovered too late that his elevated position offered no protection against a man who moved through vertical space like gravity was optional. Steven's aikido throw sent the corrupt officer tumbling into machinery, his consciousness departing before his body stopped moving. Frank provided crucial assistance with his intimate knowledge of the facility's layout, his 1980s construction work revealing hidden passages and forgotten access points. His Vietnam experience proved invaluable for improvised explosives created from mining chemicals and abandoned equipment. Electrical panel, third building, Frank directed, his military training sharp despite decades of civilian life. Cut power. There, and their night vision is useless. Steven eliminated 2 more deputies using non-lethal techniques that left them unconscious but breathing, proof of his discipline even under extreme pressure. Each victory came without killing, demonstrating the difference between a master warrior and common criminals. However, Sheriff Hartwell and his remaining officers retreated to a more defensible position among the main processing equipment, their superior firepower still commanding respect despite reduced numbers. "Collins, you worthless rookie." Hartwell's voice carried panic disguised as anger. "Call Webb. Tell him we need backup now." Through the facility's broken windows, additional headlights appeared on Highway 9, but whether friend or foe remained unclear as armed figures emerged from government vehicles. The mathematics of survival shifted again, but Steven's expression remained calm as death itself. Frank led Steven through maintenance passages that snaked beneath the mining facility like concrete arteries. His knowledge of the tunnel system gained during a brief construction job 30 years past. Despite his prosthetic leg clicking against steel grating, Frank moved with surprising agility through spaces designed for much younger men. "Built these access ways myself," Frank whispered, his voice echoing off tunnel walls. "Company wanted redundant systems for equipment failure. Never figured they'd save my life decades later." His Vietnam experience emerged as they navigated the underground maze, muscle memory guiding his hands to improvise explosive devices from abandoned mining supplies. Blasting caps, chemical accelerants, timer mechanisms, the ingredients for controlled destruction lay scattered throughout storage chambers like a terrorist's treasure trove. "Pressure differential here," Frank explained, positioning his improvised charges with engineer's precision. "Blow this support, and the whole administrative section comes down. Should buy us time and cover." Steven watched with growing respect as Frank's military training resurged despite 40 years of civilian routine. The older man's tactical thinking remained sharp, his understanding of demolitions enhanced by decades of working with mechanical systems and structural engineering. Above them, FBI vehicles disgorged federal agents in tactical gear, Agent Michelle Torres coordinating with the honest elements of local law enforcement. Deputy Collins finally revealed the extent of Sheriff Hartwell's corruption, his young conscience unable to bear the weight of criminal conspiracy. "Webb's operation is massive," Collins reported to Agent Torres. his voice shaking with relief at finally telling the truth. Money, laundering, intimidation, murder, the casino is just a front for washing Chicago mob money. The federal raid on Webb's temporary casino operation yielded computers, financial records, and enough evidence to prosecute organized crime connections, spanning multiple states. However, Webb and his core team had barricaded themselves in the casino's back rooms, armed and desperate that Frank's explosives detonated with surgical precision, dropping concrete barriers between Steven and the corrupt deputies while creating escape routes through previously impassable terrain. The controlled demolition showcased 40-year-old skills applied with deadly accuracy. Military engineers, Frank grinned, his weathered face showing satisfaction at work well done. We built things to last, and we knew how to bring them down when necessary. Steven nodded with genuine admiration, understanding that experience and wisdom could indeed overcome youth and arrogance when properly applied. That FBI agent Michelle Torres coordinated the federal response with military precision. Her tactical team surrounding Webb's makeshift casino while maintaining communication with the mining facility where gunfire still echoed through desert air. Years of investigating organized crime had prepared her for complex operations requiring multiple simultaneous actions. Webb's financial records show $40 million in dirty money from 3 Chicago families. Torres reported into her radio, cataloging evidence that would destroy criminal networks spanning half the continent. The casino was never about gambling. It's industrial-scale money laundering. Deputy Collins provided crucial intelligence about Sheriff Hartwell's corruption, his young conscience finally overcoming fear of career consequences. The extent of local law enforcement's compromise shocked even experienced federal agents accustomed to small-town corruption. Meanwhile, deep in the mine's tunnel system, Steven tracked Snake Davidson through passages carved by 19th-century miners seeking copper veins. Betty's discarded earring marked their path like breadcrumbs, each piece of jewelry a sign of her desperate attempts to leave a trail for rescue. The tunnels narrowed as they descended, electric lighting giving way to emergency battery systems that cast eerie shadows on reinforced walls. Steven's tactical flashlight revealed scratch marks where Betty had been dragged, her fingernails leaving desperate gouges in concrete and timber supports. The snake's damaged throat made him wheeze with each breath, the sound echoing through corridors like a wounded animal's death rattle. His original mission, intimidating a disabled veteran, had devolved into personal revenge against the man who'd humiliated his crew and destroyed his reputation. "Come on, hero," Snake's voice echoed from the depths, made grotesque by acoustics and throat damage. "Want to see what happens to old ladies who trust the wrong people?" Steven moved deeper into the mine's heart, following the sound of Betty's muffled protests and Snake's increasingly desperate taunts. The tunnel system branched like tree roots, each passage potentially leading to dead ends or worse, cave-ins that could trap rescuer and victim together. Emergency lighting flickered, with failing batteries, creating a strobing hellscape where shadows danced like demons. In the distance, Betty's voice carried faintly, proving she remained alive but in mortal danger. Steven's pursuit continued into darkness, each step taking him further from backup and deeper into Snake's chosen battleground where desperate criminals made their final stands. The mine's deepest chamber opened like a cathedral of industrial despair. Concrete pillars supporting tons of rock, while emergency lighting cast dancing shadows across walls scarred by decades of excavation. Snake Davidson crouched beside Betty's chair, his knife gleaming in the flickering illumination. "Welcome to the end of the line," Snake wheezed, his damaged throat making each word painful. "Just you and me now, hero. No backup, no escape routes, no fancy moves." Steven emerged from the tunnel entrance with fluid grace, his .45 automatic holstered to show peaceful intent. Betty sat bound but unharmed, her eyes showing fear mixed with stubborn defiance that reminded Steven why some people were worth dying to protect. "Let her go." Steven's whisper carried absolute authority despite the confined space. "Your fight is with me, not an innocent woman." Snake released Betty but drew twin knives, their steel catching emergency lighting like captured stars. The confined space would limit Steven's aikido mobility, or so the biker believed. Years of street fighting and prison combat had taught Snake to use environment against opponents. Tired of your parlor tricks, Snake snarled, advancing with predatory confidence. Down here, it's just muscle and steel. Prison rules. Steven's response was instantaneous and devastating. Instead of retreating from Snake's charge, he flowed toward it, using the biker's momentum against him. The first knife met Steven's palm in a perfect deflection, the blade spinning harmlessly into darkness. Snake's second thrust found empty air. As Steven sidestepped with liquid grace, his counterattack a devastating ridge hand to the solar plexus that folded the big man like a closing book. The remaining knife clattered against concrete as Snake gasped for breath that wouldn't come. The aikido throw that followed was poetry written in violence. Steven's hands finding Snake's center of gravity and redirecting it into the nearest concrete pillar. The impact echoed through the chamber like a judge's gavel, final and absolute. Snake crumpled unconscious but breathing, proving Steven's discipline even in extremity. Betty sobbed with relief as Steven cut her bonds, his gentle hands checking for injuries with professional thoroughness. "It's over," Steven assured her, though distant gunfire suggested otherwise. Above them, Webb's desperation was reaching its climax. With Frank still in mortal danger and federal agents fighting corrupt locals in a battle for Cedar Falls' soul, Webb's casino operation dissolved into chaos as FBI agents seized computers and arrested fleeing associates. But Marcus Webb himself had barricaded the back office with his remaining security team and the last few uncaptured bikers. Desperation transformed the silver-haired developer into something feral and unpredictable. Frank found himself dragged into the casino's main floor at gunpoint, Webb's manicured hands shaking as they gripped a chrome-plated pistol against the veteran's temple. The contrast was stark. Honest workmen held hostage by corrupt businessmen whose world was crumbling around expensive shoes. "Enough games," Webb screamed, his corporate composure finally cracking under pressure from Chicago. "Investors who expected results, not excuses. I want the psychopath who destroyed my operation." Now, Steven arrived alone as requested, his hands visible, but his presence somehow more threatening than any weapon. He moved with fluid certainty through the casino's garish interior, neon lights reflecting off his leather jacket like urban aurora. "Let him go." Steven's whisper carried across the gambling floor with absolute authority. "Your fight is with me." Webb's psychological collapse accelerated as he stared into Steven's dark eyes, recognizing something beyond his understanding: commitment that couldn't be bought, courage that couldn't be intimidated, honor that made no business sense. 40 years of using money and threats to solve problems had left him unprepared for true moral strength. "You don't understand." Webb's voice rose to hysteria. "This is legitimate business. Urban development. Economic progress." Frank showed no fear despite the gun against his skull, his military bearing intact, even facing death. When Webb's attention wavered, distracted by Steven's steady approach, Frank's elbow drove backward into his captor's solar plexus with Vietnam-trained precision. The chrome pistol spun across polished floor as Webb doubled over, gasping like a landed fish. Steven moved forward with measured steps, each footfall echoing like drumbeats in the sudden silence. "It's over," Steven announced with quiet finality. "No more hiding behind lawyers and corrupt badges. Time to face consequences." Webb's remaining security fled rather than face the man who'd systematically destroyed an entire criminal organization. The casino's neon lights flickered like dying stars as sirens wailed outside, federal justice finally arriving in Cedar Falls. Agent Torres and her team flooded through the entrance, weapons drawn but unnecessary. Steven stepped aside as handcuffs clicked around Webb's wrists. Justice delivered with federal efficiency. Dawn broke over Cedar Falls like a new beginning as FBI agents processed the largest organized crime arrest in Nevada state history. Webb Development's criminal empire collapsed with mathematical precision. Computer files revealing money laundering operations that stretched from Chicago to Las Vegas, with tentacles reaching into 6 different states. Agent Torres coordinated the massive evidence collection, her team cataloging financial records that would dismantle criminal networks for years to come. Webb's casino project died with its creator's arrest, the proposed development permanently blocked by federal prosecutors seeking to prevent criminal exploitation. Sheriff Hartwell sat in his own patrol car's back seat, federal handcuffs replacing his badge of authority. The corruption investigation revealed bribes totaling over $200,000, enough to purchase silence, but not enough to buy freedom from federal justice. 25 to life. Agent Torres informed Frank as they watched the corrupt sheriff's transport. Federal racketeering charges carry mandatory minimums that even his lawyers can't negotiate away. The surviving Death's Head and Scorpion crew members faced similar fates, their criminal brotherhood dissolved by federal prosecution and internal betrayal. Snake Davidson's unconscious form was loaded into an ambulance under heavy guard, his future measured in decades behind federal bars. Judge Patricia Wells arrived to oversee the legal proceedings, her steel gray hair and sharper eyes missing nothing as she ensured proper procedures protected everyone's constitutional rights, even the criminals who tried to destroy her community. All charges against Mr. Steven dismissed with prejudice, Judge Wells announced with satisfaction. Self-defense and defense of others are not crimes in this jurisdiction. Frank's shop insurance was retroactively reinstated by Webb's seized assets, federal prosecutors ensuring victims received compensation from criminal profits. The parts warehouse would be rebuilt better than before, Morrison's auto repair guaranteed to survive and prosper. Deputy Collins received commendation for his courage in revealing corruption, his testimony crucial for federal convictions. Young conscience had triumphed over career fear, proving that good people could still choose justice over convenience. Betty reopened her diner the next morning, coffee brewing and apple pies cooling as normal life returned to Main Street. The paper crane Steven had left on her counter served as reminder that heroes sometimes appeared when least expected but most needed. Cedar Falls breathed freely for the first time in months, its citizens walking taller knowing that courage and community could still triumph over organized evil. Betty's diner overflowed with celebrants as Cedar Falls held its first genuine community gathering in years. Red vinyl booths and checkered linoleum, hosting conversations that mixed relief with renewed hope. Coffee flowed freely while Betty's apple pies disappeared faster than she could bake them. Never thought I'd see this town show backbone again, Raymond Fisher admitted, his retired teacher's voice thick with emotion. Watching you two stand up to those animals reminded us what courage looks like. Frank found himself surrounded by neighbors who'd rediscovered their own bravery through his example. Tom Bradley offered to service Frank's shop vehicles at cost. Martha Hendricks volunteered to handle his books. The community that had scattered under criminal pressure was rebuilding itself through mutual support. Betty, Frank said quietly, his weathered hands nervous as a teenager's. Would you maybe like to have dinner sometime? Someplace nice, not just coffee and pie. Her smile lit the diner like sunrise, 40 years of unspoken feelings finally finding voice. Frank Morrison, I thought you'd never ask. Margaret always said you were too stubborn for your own good. The town council arrived in formal procession, Mayor Henderson carrying a ceremonial key to the city carved from local pine. Steven, Cedar Falls would be honored to name you our official security consultant. Permanent position, full benefits, whatever salary you name. Steven accepted their gratitude with characteristic humility, his quiet presence somehow more impressive than any speech. Appreciate the offer, but my path leads elsewhere. Other communities need help. Other battles need fighting. Judge Wells presided over an impromptu ceremony, her authority lending dignity to the community's gratitude. Courage, she announced, is not the absence of fear but action in spite of fear. Both men demonstrated what it means to stand for justice. The celebration continued past sunset, neighbors reconnecting over shared experiences and renewed hopes. Children played safely in streets where fear had ruled just days before. Elderly couples walked hand in hand past shops that would remain open and honest. Steven sat quietly in the corner, observing the community he'd helped save with satisfaction. That ran deeper than personal pride. Frank's transformation from defeated victim to confident leader was complete, the veteran's dignity restored through combat and companionship. As midnight approached, the celebration gradually wound down, leaving behind bonds forged through shared danger and common purpose. Cedar Falls had rediscovered its soul through crisis, emerging stronger and more united than before. Monday morning arrived with desert sunrise painting Main Street in shades of gold and possibility. Morrison's auto repair buzzed with activity as customers returned in numbers Frank hadn't seen since Margaret's death, his reputation enhanced by his stand against criminal intimidation. Steven prepared for departure with the same methodical precision he'd shown in combat, his few possessions packed efficiently in the Mercury Grand Marquis that had carried him to Cedar Falls like some mechanized angel of justice. The brake work that had brought them together was long complete, but deeper repairs had been accomplished. "Stay," Frank offered one final time, his voice carrying genuine affection for the man who'd become brother and teacher. "Partnership in the shop, half of everything. Betty makes enough coffee to keep us both awake, and this town could use a man like you." Steven's refusal came with gentle firmness, his dark eyes already seeing distant horizons where other battles waited. "Path leads elsewhere, Frank. Other good people need help, other communities need protection. Can't settle down when justice keeps moving." Frank understood with soldier's acceptance, recognizing the calling that drove certain men to serve without thought of personal comfort. He offered Steven's hand a final shake, calloused palms meeting in mutual respect between warriors who'd shared danger and emerged victorious. The paper crane Steven left on Frank's workbench was folded from a page of automotive repair manual, its wings creased with precision that transformed mundane text into origami art. A reminder that beauty could emerge from practical things when shaped by patient hands. "What about you?" Steven asked, noting Betty's early arrival with fresh coffee and warm pastries. "Teaching self-defense classes for the kids," Frank replied, his weathered face showing satisfaction at discovering new purpose. "Pass along what? You taught me about standing up for what's right." Steven drove away as morning mist lifted from the desert, his Mercury disappearing into heat shimmer like smoke returning to sky. Frank watched until distance claimed the car, understanding that some heroes walked among ordinary people quietly, appearing when justice needed champions to eye in the shop's backroom. A group of teenagers waited for their first lesson in courage and self-defense, Frank's patient voice explaining how strength came from character rather than size. The paper crane watched over them all, wings spread toward tomorrow's possibilities. If you like the story, please watch another story on our channel and subscribe to the channel.